Shade Oak Stud is nestled in the North Shropshire countryside. Established in 1973, the stud boasts an impressive selection of stallions, around 80 resident mares and approximately 65 foals, all set in 200 acres of lush grassland. It is the home of Peter and Emma Hockenhull, who have embraced environmental sustainability as a normal factor in running a healthy stud for over a decade. As part of our commitment to environmental sustainability, the TBA asked Ruth Dancer from White Griffin, Equine Environmental Sustainability Specialists, and Sarah Wynne from ADAS, Specialists in Land Management, to visit Shade Oak Stud to learn more about how they run their studs sustainably.
Peter, hi!
Welcome to Shade Oak.
Thank you, thanks for having us here today. We're really looking forward to having a look around the farm.
Good.
Well, already I can see in front of us this beautiful oak tree, and this is just one of many that you actually planted on site, isn't it?
This is the first tree I ever planted, and when I came here, Shade Oak didn't have an oak tree. So I planted that about 34 years ago.
And I suppose it speaks of a lot of the initiatives that we're going to see here on site today. Just talk us through some of the things that you've done in the last 30 or so years.
Well, having taken over from my father, this was a dairy farm originally, and there was no dividing hedges. I think I planted well over 10 kilometres of hedges in that time and developed this into a stud, really.
And as we know, part of the challenge of environmental sustainability isn't just about those initiatives to minimise our impact. It's actually adapting to the inevitable changes and that we're seeing in our climate and how that impacts farming. Up here on your farm, is that something that you've had to think about, and is that part of the changes that you've had to make as well?
It hasn't impacted us too much in that respect. We don't have large-scale flooding in this area. So in that front, we're sort of unaffected. But running a lot of horses here, certainly the longer, wetter winters, in order to protect the land, I've had to take measures to do that, and pretty well preserve my grazing for the peak periods during the stud season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure you can probably sort of tell from the images that we've seen around the country. I think we were talking when we were knee deep in water for a lot of this year. It's a big concern for farmers.
It's significant poaching, the risk of damage to the horses' legs if they're in deep mud. So yeah, being able to manage the lands that you're reducing, that is so important going forwards.
And that's a great point, because horse welfare, of course, is inextricably linked with environmental sustainability. I can hear some of your horses making a fair bit of sound over there. Should we go and take a look and
Yes.
take a look at their paddocks?
Certainly, we'll go now.
Lead the way.
Grasslands are excellent at storing carbon and form a vital part of preserving a healthy ecosystem. As land managers, it is important to maintain healthy soil and swards for our horses, but also for the wider biodiversity that thrives on our stud farms.
So this is one of the paddocks on the farm. We have about 200 acres in total. This paddock now is currently inhabited by the brood mares. A little bit of a changeover, this being slightly further away from the house. We're able to use this for the mares now, whereas obviously during the stud season there's more of a demand on those paddocks that are within easy walking range of the actual farm itself. So a little bit of a change gone on. This is used in the early season by the youngsters, and now the mares are on. It is difficult. We would have a higher stocking level than most places. Primarily, we do a lot of topping to make sure that the pastures, try and stay as young as they can and keep producing throughout the season. We do have to fertilise a little bit at the start of the year, but most of the fertilising now is taking place by putting the manure back on the fields. So that makes the bulk of it, and it does enable actually a slower but more lengthy growing period for the grass.
Yeah, and it's putting all that wonderful organic matter back in the soil as well. And I notice as we look down at your sward here, you've also got the clovers in here to help fix nitrogen in here, reduce the amount of additional nitrogen you're needing to apply.
A bit of clover. The horses seemingly like a bit of Italian, they like a bit of sweetness to it. There's obviously got to be a fair amount of the smaller fescues and creeping fescues to sort of, horses are quite, how can I say, they wear and tear a paddock. Someone once said there's 5 mouths on a horse, one on each end of each leg and one they actually eat from. And certainly, you know, that wear and tear, you have to have something to hold it and knit it together.
Yeah, and I mean, this pasture certainly looks brilliant. Your manures are doing the right thing. And you mentioned that you have also been applying lime to the pastures, and how have you found that's affected them?
It was brought to my attention with fertiliser prices literally in the recent increase in all oil products going through the roof, and I had to find a way of maximising what fertiliser there's generally in the soil. And so yes, I pretty well looked at what the pH levels were, and we limed accordingly. They also suggested 1 or 2 different limes to max into what the mineral content, so it's a bit beyond me, I'm afraid, but we went through the entire farm and brought them all up to a pH of around about 6.5.
And that's helping you to reduce your use of manufactured nitrogen fertiliser. Yes. That combined with your clover and also the manures you're applying is really helping you to reduce your climate impact.
Yes.
In the managing of your land. So it really just shows how sustainability goes hand in hand with profitable, economically viable farming, and also horse welfare. These wonderful pastures are really helping to manage your horses well. But I'm now going to go off and have a look at your manure while you head off and look at some biodiversity things with Ruth.
Great. Do you want to show me to your woodlands?
Yes.
Promoting diversity on the land is vital to supporting nature in all its forms, and woodland creation is a priority in the UK and worldwide. Trees sequester carbon, thereby playing an important role in minimising climate change, as well as providing a vital habitat to a range of birds, mammals and insects.
So just walking up to here, you can't fail to notice this woodland area and hedges. Is this something again that you've planted since you've been resident here on Shade Oak?
Yes, this is about 20 years old. The land itself here is so stony it was good for nothing else. Right. And rather than waste it, I thought, why not plant some trees?
What have we got in here? What did you choose?
The soil is so bad there. I plumped for something, a Scots pine mainly, but round the outside where it's a little bit better, I've managed to get some more deciduous trees in. There's oaks, there's ash, there's beech, there's a whole. I just picked a load out of the book and planted them all.
And they're clearly thriving here. How many have you got around the site? Do you know what volume of woodland coverage you have?
I don't. There's this one, another one behind us, which I planted on a part of the field that's really wet and boggy and was no good for anything else again. I have another one down by the house round a pond area, which I planted there. So about 3 or 4 sites, I suppose, totaling around about maybe an acre and a half.
And you mentioned it's quite boggy around there. Have you noticed since you put the trees in that they're actually drawing a lot of the water away and actually supporting you with that land management? During
the growing season, certainly. Obviously, in the outer season, the winter, they don't do a lot. And so, yeah, then it becomes another boggy mass again.
Okay. And it's not just trees. I mean, we've got quite an interesting hedge here, but actually all the way around. How much hedgerow do you have at Shade Oak?
I planted, I think, around about 10 kilometres of hedges.
Yourself?
Well, yes, and actually, you know, we haven't necessarily gone by the book in terms of the canes and the actual protective sheaves and all that. We've sort of much more on a basic level, in with a bit of a bar, put the little sapling in. And the cost of a sapling is relatively cheap, you know, 12, 13, 14, 15p for a sapling. And as you can see, we haven't had a bad take up here. This was a little bit of sheep fencing in at the base, and then we've applied a bit of electric to keep the horses off it. Yep. That's pretty well redundant now as the hedge itself has established itself. This would be about 4 or 5 years. The electric could well be taken out. There's a bit of a visible deterrent there. I've used a bit of old tape, again reusing things to try and as things sort of generate themselves.
And actually, as you say, I mean, this is a few years old, but some of the hedges are really quite substantial. They seem like a really great way of actually keeping the horses in where you want them to be.
I think they're the best way. I mean, we've tried everything from electric, tried rails, we've tried everything. And from my point of view, the hedge is not just a safe barrier, it's one that also provides a little bit of a eyesight line in terms of such a visible opposing thing that they don't try and take on.
I've noticed that they can use it as a form of self-medication almost. They can selectively graze what they need at any given time, and actually the provision of the trees, the provision of the hedging is good for horse welfare in terms of a shelter, shade and fodder point of view.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The sides of my hedges are pretty well grazed throughout.
So that's not your hedge trimmer, that's
not my hedge
old-fashioned horse.
You know, I like to have a nice sort of A-frame hedge, and I like them to grow right down to the bottom, but that's to increase the visible aspect of them. But the horses, particularly when those shoots are young, they spend a lot of time just actually grazing the hedges.
And yes, it's great for that horse welfare, but I mean, you've got some butterflies skipping around your head right now. We've noticed a lot of hares on your property. Putting this kind of thing in rather than just standard fencing and standard paddock management seems to have really enhanced the ecosystem on your farm in general, because as we know, wildlife likes variety. So by having this richness in your hedges, different types of trees, you're really giving them a support system to thrive here as well as your horses.
It's become it wasn't what I started when I planned all this. It was mainly for me to ensure the safety and well-being of the horses and to ensure that they had an environment in which I could rear them necessarily. And the hedges were established because I find it the most economic way. The biodiversity and the other things, there's been the benefit of it. Yes. It came as a secondary to me. So I enjoy that side of it, but I have to say it was mainly for the well-being of the horses is how I ended up with 16 kilometres of hedges.
Of course, absolutely. Well, it looks absolutely beautiful, I have to say, when you look across the acreage and you just have, as you say, kilometre after kilometre of hedgerow. It really does benefit the aesthetic as well as financially, biodiversity and horse welfare. It's a bit of a win-win-win-win going on here.
And I enjoy them as well.
So. Let's take a look at the next part of the farm.
The running of a stud farm of this scale requires a large volume of energy for heating, lighting and powering equipment. Peter and Emma have a range of different approaches to generating that energy that are enabling Shade Oak Stud to move away from fossil fuels.
So the foals and mares have joined us, but actually we're not going to talk about them right now. What I wanted to ask you about is this rather magnificent thing in the background. And you've got quite a number of renewable initiatives on site. When did you install this wind turbine?
About 2012.
And what kind of a return are you getting in terms of the power it's able to produce?
Well, financially, it pretty well got there in about 10 years. That's it paid for itself.
Great.
So that was quite good.
And I'm assuming it doesn't fulfil all your electricity needs on site. What else do you have here?
We have solar, and they balance each other pretty well. Yesterday was a lovely sunny day, and the solar was going flat out. Today, cloudy, overcast, and the wind turbine's sort of contributing.
I guess that's quite a nice sight for you when you're walking up and down these lanes to see the turbine turning.
It is, and stressful when it's not, but no, it is, and it's obviously my weather vane. I know exactly where the wind's coming on as well, so.
And interesting, I did notice coming to the farm today that yours is not the only one, but I think you were the first, but your neighbours also have them too.
A couple of small ones, and then there's about four or five of us now that have the sort of slightly larger one. I mean, that's about 75 kilowatts,
right.
Which is probably more than enough to supply Shade Oak, and primarily without wind data at the time, and that was a very expensive thing to go down, trying to assess how much you know, whether the wind turbine would pay for itself or how much we develop. It seems sensible to manage it within the capabilities or the capacity of the farm, so I was to maximise most of what was produced.
Yeah, absolutely, and I mean, you obviously understand the detail of that extremely well. A lot of people still seem quite unsure and maybe unhappy with wind turbines in general, and one of those issues is how it would impact the horses. But I mean, you've got a beautiful mare that's come to join us right now. They don't seem bothered by this intrusion.
Right from one. They've never bothered with it. I mean, day one, the horses went onto this field and literally were grazing right underneath it. Right. So we've never had an issue. Yeah.
So you've got the solar, you've got the turbine. At the moment, that's producing a proportion of your energy when we have sun and wind. What do you need to do in terms of completely eliminate your energy bill?
Batteries makes the obvious thing. That would fill in, enabled me to utilise. I would stop exporting electricity to the grid and utilise all the energy I produce on site. So about 35 kilowatts of batteries, I think, would probably bring me down to a net zero as regards importing electricity.
That would be a great return for you in terms of cost of running the farm.
It would. There's a lot of lights on within the stud itself. Trying to mares to cycle early, one tends to want to have the lights on at night and things like that. So, yes.
And would that also be true of heating? Because you actually have a biomass boiler on site, is that right?
I do, and that pumps heat around all the dwellings, and all those pumps are electrically operated. So, yes.
So they're essentially all working together in harmony, and ultimately with the battery storage, you would entirely eliminate fossil fuels from the energy provision on this stud.
I would.
Can we take a look at your biomass boiler?
We can.
We'll have to leave you behind, I'm afraid. It's clear from talking to you here today, you've obviously got a technical background, and I see lots of things around the farm. Is this something that you studied previously?
I studied engineering at university.
So that's going to help you a lot. And I can see just in front of us here, we've got this huge contraption. Is this one of yours?
It's a muck bin that we use within the stud, and it's really there to sort of increase the efficiency in the way in which we muck out the stables.
Yeah, but you built this.
I built that,
designed it. And that mentality of sort of innovation and reusing and using materials you have on site to make the site work more efficiently for you, it seems like a big part of how you run Shade Oak.
Yeah, I hate waste, essentially. I mean, so waste of any kind, waste of manpower, the waste of materials, any sort of waste sort of drives me to be more efficient and better.
And that's the core of sustainability, isn't it? I mean, it's great if you can invest in things like the solar and the turbine behind, but having that mentality of not being wasteful, using what you have, using your hands. I mean, that's something that we don't have quite so much of these days, but such an important part of being a successful stud yard owner.
Yeah, my father was very hands-on, so I was brought up in that frame, and certainly it's something that I'm very proud of, because it's enabled me to do so much of the things that we've done around the farm.
And is that something you're passing on to your son as well, that technical, practical knowledge? Is he going to whip one of these up?
I don't think quite yet. No, he hasn't had that, and indeed he's come back to work on the stud now, and he's finding this all very strange.
But it's an important technique for us all to learn, or an important skill for us all to learn, isn't it? How to create things for ourselves, how to use the materials that we have to create a prosperous yard.
Yeah, I think so. It's not a skill that's generally out there anymore. No. So we'll see.
And I can see we've got a huge stack of pallets here, so we should keep heading around to your biomass and take a look at that.
So this is my biomass boiler. It's been in operation now for over 10 years, and this is now responsible for heating pretty well all the houses on the place.
Oh wow, and I remember your house is quite old, isn't it? It's quite leaky, so is this saving you a fair bit?
That was the principal reason why I installed this in the first place, but now it's graduated from not heating just my house, but also all the staff accommodation. And that's, it's nice to be able to provide a nice warm house for the staff members that reside here, particularly after a cold day working on the stud.
Yeah, absolutely. And as sustainability professionals, we tend to not like burning things. Burning means emissions, but actually in this case, this means that you've not had to use fossil fuels for quite some time. What do you actually use in your biomass boiler?
At the moment, it's burning waste wood, which would otherwise go on landfill. We can burn straw. I have done in the past, and miscanthus. So it is quite a versatile boiler. But by far the best results are obtained by burning the wood.
For most equine land managers, removal, composting or processing of manure can be a constant headache and also a costly burden. Manure management is tightly legislated, and incorrect handling can result in pollutants entering the waterways. At Shade Oak Stud, Peter is currently working on a new way to utilise bedding and manure.
We find you here at Peter's manure pile.
Yeah, and I've been having a look around, Peter, and this is a great site for a manure heap. You've got your earth banks, you've got your solid base, no water courses nearby, so you're able to capture all of the liquids that come out of your manure. No risk to water. Can you just explain a little bit about your manure management process on this part of the property?
Certainly, we obviously bring it way up here, and this is where I turn it and help it to compost as fast as I can by using my telehandler, and it'll accommodate a fair bite. We found we almost outgrew this site actually as we've grown in terms of the amount of manure we churn out nowadays.
And your big challenge is you've got straw bedding here. It takes quite a long time to break down, doesn't it? So all that volume, it's filling this site.
Left untouched, this wouldn't break down at all for year upon year. So it needs a mechanical intervention to turn it over, and you have to keep turning it in order to get that material to actually compost itself. And even then, it's going to take sort of 18 months, maybe even longer, to get this to break down.
And you found that there's another way that you can do this, and we're going to go and have a look at what you're doing down on the yard to try and help speed up this breakdown process.
We are.
Shall we go have a look?
Yeah. Yeah, this area started off as my turnout area. Running a stud means there are extreme demands in the winter periods. This enables me to exercise the horses daily, get them out of the boxes without actually poaching the land and ruining it, because I need that grass later on in the season. So it started off life like that. We had a wood chip surface on it, and that functioned really well. But now with wood chip sort of 3 or 4 times the expense, it's become uneconomical to surface this. Yeah. So then I had the idea of using the straw litter from out the boxes and use that. And I found that the mares running around on this broke it down really well, sort of breaking that cell wall down and enabling the straw to sort of compost itself in a quicker way. That in itself was fast, but of course then the surface needs relaying ever so often. And in fact, probably at least once a month, this would have to be relayed down with straw litter again in order that it was a nice surface for the horses to get out on. So then I started stockpiling it up and scraping it off and relaying it. And sadly that then took out the base layer, the tarmac, and I've had to think hard about investing a lot of money in putting a concrete surface, something that can withstand the rigours of me scraping and relaying down.
Okay, so and this whole process is really helping you to make your manure management a lot more efficient. You're able to break the straw down, you're able to compost it more quickly. When you're stacking it here, it's then able to rot down more quickly, and that's given you a product that is so much better and easier to spread on your land when you come to apply it in the autumn.
Completing a carbon footprint is very common in the agricultural sector, but an entirely new practice for equine farmers like Peter. With the help of the TBA's Stud Farm Carbon Calculator, Shade Oak Stud is now able to record and track its carbon emissions annually, and to better understand its environmental impact from a greenhouse gas perspective.
So you've been working, or your son's been working with my colleague Liam to complete the TBA Stud Farm Carbon Calculator. So how did he find it?
I think he found it very straightforward. Liam was very helpful and really just sort of took him through stage by stage, and I think it was accomplished really quite quickly.
So let's have a look at your results then. We can clearly see that feed and bedding here is the big spike. So what can you do to manage your feed and bedding emissions?
Very little in regard to feed. Obviously, I'm dependent upon the feed manufacturers as to reducing anything in there. And the bedding in the manure, I deal with that by trying to minimise its effect by reincorporating the manure into the land as fertiliser, and therefore having the benefit of not having that spike of inorganic fertilisers on the place.
Yeah, and we can clearly see that within your results here, and that your manure management emissions are possibly slightly higher than some farms that would export their manures, but your nitrogen application emissions are significantly lower.
Yes.
So you're managing to get that double benefit from your manures anyway.
And we improve the soil quality as well.
Yeah, brilliant. And going forwards, how do you think the results from the carbon footprint will actually help you to manage the farm and reduce your costs as well as your climate impact?
The results are very simply displayed and very easy to see, and therefore from my point of view one can see which areas need more focus than others. I think I can actually improve my energy requirements by installing batteries and get that probably halved, if not completely removed. I think within the capabilities of what I have in the kilowattage of solar and turbine, the batteries, we should be self-sufficient in electricity.
That's really good news. And then with the feed and bedding, it's really about us working with the feed companies, isn't it? Trying to reduce the climate impact, the embedded emissions associated with what you're purchasing.
Yeah, I think within the feed, I think the soya makes up the largest part of that. Whilst it's the most digestible form of protein available to horse, there's going to be a fair reluctance to change that, but obviously they could probably source it differently.
Yeah, that's it. Looking for sustainable sources, low deforestation sources will definitely help to bring that emissions down. So thank you very much for running through your footprint with us.
Shade Oak Stud is a good example of incremental change over time to create an ever more sustainable operation. Peter has quite literally planted tiny shoots and watched them grow, and through a combination of engineering knowledge, which has enabled him to understand what infrastructure to put in place, and farming insight, which has created a green and diverse ecosystem, Peter has built a sustainable operation that will continue to benefit both the horses in his care and also the environment that he and his family are the owners and custodians of.
It is such a privilege to take care of horses, and you seem to be doing it successfully in a way that meets both their needs and the needs of the land. What does the future look like for you at Shade Oak?
Well, I don't see there being a conflict between looking after horses and being sustainable. And I think that the carbon footprint indicator was a very valuable tool in going forward and probably improving my farming practices.
Well, it's immeasurably important for you to share your experience and your stories with us today. We're so grateful for you having us with us, and really best of luck for the future.
Thank you.
Being in the business of creating the next generation of top quality racehorses means always having an eye on the future. Peter and his team at Shade Oak Stud recognise that investing in the business in a way that creates the highest quality foals is the same as acting sustainably. When done correctly, it is possible to take steps which not only protect the environment, but also promote good horse welfare, make stud practices more efficient, and enable a prosperous breeding business.